In this video, we're going to create a gear icon that we can use for a settings button in something like a mobile app. Let's get started by activating the circles and ellipses tool here and creating a circle. I'm holding Control here to create a perfect circle. This is going to be the main part of the gear. We will eventually turn it white, but for now the color doesn't really matter. If your circle happens to have a stroke around it, however, you can turn it off by shift-clicking the red X down here in the color palette. Let's next switch to the Squares and Rectangles tool and create a rectangle at the top of the circle. This is going to be the object we use to create the spokes of the gear. Next, we need to turn this into a path by going to Path, Object to Path. Now we can switch to the Node tool and drag this bottom left node to the left a bit while holding Control to constrain the movement. And we can also move the top left node to the right a bit. Now let's switch to the Select tool and let's duplicate this object by pressing Ctrl D. Next, let's click this button in the controls bar to flip the duplicate horizontally. Let's turn off snapping, then move the duplicate to the right some while holding Control until the spoke is about the width we want. Okay, now let's select both of these paths, and we want to turn them into a single path by going to Path Union. We also want to center this vertically with the circle. We can do that by selecting them both, then open the Align and Distribute dialog by clicking this button in the commands bar, and now we can click this button to center them vertically. Okay, so to get the spokes all the way around the circle, we have a few options. One way is to first turn snapping back on and enable rotation center snapping with this button. Next, let's deselect the objects, then select just the spoke and click it again to get the rotation handles. And now we can drag the spoke's rotation center down until it snaps to the circle's rotation center. Next, we can duplicate the spoke with Ctrl D, then drag one of the corner handles of the spoke while holding Control to snap the angle, and rotate it until it's where we want it. We can then keep repeating these steps until we have spokes all the way around the circle. Alright, so that's one way of doing it. Another way is, as long as we want to have an even number of spokes, we can use the Arrange dialog. First, let's delete all but the top spoke. Now let's open the Arrange dialog by going to Object, Arrange. For this, we want to use the Polar Coordinates tab, which lets us arrange objects around an ellipse. Next, we need to decide how many spokes we want on our gear. It has to be an even number, and I will go with 8. So I will duplicate the spoke object 7 times. Now we can select all of the spoke objects, and we can check in the status bar to make sure we have the correct number of objects. Then we can also select a circle, and with the default settings chosen in the Arrange dialog, all we have to do is click the Arrange button. However, in my version of Inkscape, there seems to be a bug that causes it to not work properly at first. So if this happens to you as well, we can fix it pretty easily. First, let's undo that. Then let's choose the Parameterize option here and click Arrange. Undo again, switch back to the first selected circle option and click Arrange again. There we go, now it's working correctly. The next thing we want to do is cut a circle out of the center of the gear. First, we don't need all of these objects to be separate anymore, so we can turn them all into a single path by going to Path Union. Now let's draw a circle over here. Let's change the fill color to something else. Now let's select both objects and center them vertically and horizontally with these two buttons in the Align and Distribute dialog. And we can adjust the size of the circle if necessary. I'm holding Shift and Control here to keep it centered and circular. I'm also going to duplicate this circle, change the color, and scale it down while holding Shift and Control. Now let's select the outer circle and the gear, and we can cut the circle out of the gear by going to Path Difference. Then we can select both of these and union them into a single path. Let's now create another bigger circle to use as the background of the icon. And I'm going to give this one of these blue colors over here. Now we can select both of these and center them vertically and horizontally. Then let's select just the circle and move it below the gear by clicking this button in the controls bar. Okay, now we can make the gear white. For the final touch, we can give the gear a long shadow. One way to do this is to create a rectangle. Let's make it black. Then let's click it again to get the rotation handles. And while holding Control, let's grab one of the corner handles and rotate it 3 times so that it's rotated 45 degrees. Now with custom node snapping enabled here, we want to move the rectangle over here until the leftmost node snaps to the cusp node of this spoke here. Then we can switch to the squares and rectangles tool and drag this handle until it snaps to the spoke up here. Now let's switch to the select tool and click this button in the controls bar again to move the object below the gear. The next thing we want to do is get rid of this part that's extending beyond the circle. We can do this by duplicating the circle, then adding the rectangle to the selection and going to Path, Intersection. We also need to get rid of this part here. I would do this by first switching to the Pen tool and creating a path around this area. Then I will select the path I just created and the shadow object and go to Path, Difference. And finally, let's lower the opacity of the shadow object. I will do this by clicking in this opacity box in the status bar and scrolling down the mouse wheel. I'd say around 25 or so looks pretty good. Okay, now we have a settings icon. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want many more Inkscape tutorials like this, including a detailed tutorial about the Arrange dialog, be sure to check out my Inkscape Deep Dive course. You can find links to it in the description below. See you in the next video.